Happy New Year, everybody. I'm thrilled to be back here with you, really I am. I'm going to just keep saying that. And then I will start to believe myself. No, I had some good time off, thank you. Just letting you get in position here. I had some good time off, but a lot is going on here in the city, and there is a lot to work on. So why don't we start? I can tell you a little bit about my conversation with the Deputy Prime Minister this afternoon. What do they say in Ottawa? We had a fair and frank exchange of views.
Was it full and frank?
It was full and fair and frank. There were lots of F's. No, it was actually a terrific conversation. I will say that Minister Freeland has really taken her ambit to heart. I think this is her second, maybe even third time in Alberta in the 6 weeks since she has been named to her position, and certainly a bunch of things that we talked about when we first met, which was her first day of work back in November. She has already moved on and taken some action on, so that's good. So we had a good conversation about some of the benefits for our economic development files, in particular of the new NAFTA. Hopefully that will be ratified by the Canadian Parliament soon. I understand it's already been ratified by Mexico and is very close to ratification in the United States. So I hope that we'll be able to move forward on that and provide some certainty for investors who are thinking about opportunities here in Calgary. We talked, as I always do, with federal government people about infrastructure and housing issues, about transit issues. But really our conversation was focused on the things the federal government can be doing to help us with our number one priority, which is job creation and attraction and retention here in Calgary.
So is there a link between economic development and a free trade agreement, or are there two separate things that you mentioned with her?
Both.
Okay.
So, there are certainly a number of implications of the new NAFTA that I need to understand better. So, for example, when we signed CETA, the trade agreement with Europe, it actually had very significant implications to procurement. So, in other words, we have to open our procurement to European companies, but Calgary companies also have the opportunity to bid on municipal work across Europe. So I need to do my homework to better understand what's going on with the new NAFTA there. But also it's very related to economic development, because now that that's in place, we can make a number of arguments to people who are interested, especially international firms that are interested in a beachhead in North America, about how they can access the large US market from a headquarters in Canada and particularly in Calgary. So having that thing ratified will help us a lot in terms of the certainty that we can provide to these international investors.
You mentioned that since your first meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister, she's moved on a number of the files you brought up. Can you be specific on what those are?
Hopefully there'll be some big news and some good news to announce soon, but it will surprise no one that, for example, I am working still on ensuring that we've got a good cash flow situation as relates to the Green Line. That's not Minister Freeland's portfolio, but certainly it's something that I raise with every federal person every time I get the opportunity, because we've got to get to an answer to that here in the first quarter of 2020. In addition, there's a couple of particular economic development files, and I've been really pushing the federal government to get more engaged with us in economic development for some time, and I'm really interested to see how the federal government can help tell Calgary's story as well.
So specifically, you can put some flesh on those bones. Does that mean that you want federal ministers when they go to Europe to be talking up Calgary and what its needs are?
Sure. I know that Canada's Chief Trade Commissioner is also in Calgary today, and so there's a network of trade commissioners across the world, and I want them to really be armed with the Calgary story. That as they are talking to people who are interested in Canada, they can talk about Calgary, not just places with which they might be more familiar. I want to ensure that federal ministers and the Prime Minister, as they are telling the story of Canada and encouraging investment, that Calgary is part of their story as well. And so hopefully we'll be able to move significantly on some very big files at the moment.
On Green Line, are you getting any indication that the federal government is open to the idea of more front-end loading?
Yes, but being open to the idea versus actually inking something with the three partners, Calgary, Alberta, and Canada, that's what I'm looking for.
So what does that require? Is it an addendum to the agreement that Ottawa's already signed, or something already new, a whole new document, or what does it mean?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm less interested in the mechanics of what's happening than with the outcomes. But I can explain what we're talking about here, as I don't want to be too obtuse. When the government of Alberta pulled back $500 million from the early years of the Green Line, it put us in a difficult situation because that's too much money to go to the bank and borrow and pay interest on while we're waiting for the Alberta government to back end their funding. Normally, the federal government does back end their funding because they usually pay you once you submit the receipts. And so the question is the federal government willing to step into the gap, understanding that the federal government, Liberal and Conservative, have had a real problems getting infrastructure money out the door? So are they willing to actually get this $1.5 billion out the door quickly in order to get this project started on time? And certainly every indication I've had from the federal government is that's a conversation they're willing to have. But it does mean I want to get this formalized and inked as soon as possible.
And was your conversation on infrastructure limited solely to the Green Line, or were there other projects?
Oh, we also talked, as I always do, with federal ministers, a little bit about housing, but really about how we can ensure that federal infrastructure commitments actually get to municipalities and get spent. We didn't go into too much detail on that. She's not the infrastructure minister after all, but that is something that I want to always stress.
Is there the sense that the minister in Ottawa in general gets what's going on in Alberta and the struggles and what Alberta needs and is making it the priority that you believe it should be?
Look, I'm always hugely optimistic, sometimes naively optimistic. But the fact that the Prime Minister phoned me the day after the election to talk about that, to talk about Calgary and what Calgary needed, and the fact that when I was in Ottawa, I was there coincidentally on the first day that the cabinet was announced, and I met with 5 senior cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister on that day, tells me that the message has been heard. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. The fact that the Deputy Prime Minister has been to Alberta, and I've had 2 meetings with her in 6 weeks. That's not typical. That said, the proof is always in the pudding. And it really is clear that there are some things that we need from the federal government, and not just the things we've talked about. I'm confident that the Trans Mountain Pipeline is going to get built. I don't need them to say every day the Trans Mountain Pipeline is going to get built. I just need it to get built. I'm confident that the Premier and the Prime Minister are not going to see eye to eye on the carbon tax, but that ultimately we'll wait for those court challenge decisions to come back from the Supreme Court, and then we won't keep fighting about it. We'll move forward based on what that is. But beyond those things, there are very positive things the federal government could be doing to help us with our economic recovery here, to assist us in economic development, to help us build our pipelines, not that kind of pipeline, our pipelines, those two. Our pipelines of businesses that are interested in investing here, to invest in infrastructure and in innovation in our post-secondary institutions here. So there's a lot that could be done beyond the stuff that's grabbing the headlines about fights between the province and the feds. And that's really where I'm focused.
When is drop dead time in 2020 to Green Line construction in 2021? When do you need to know from the feds they're willing to change things?
I'm really scared to answer that question. I'm not really scared to answer that question. The challenge is when you're dealing with other orders of government, you give them drop-dead deadlines, you end up with situations where you get a funding agreement for the Olympics 7 days before a referendum. So you can imagine that I don't want to play my cards too hard here, but as I've said before, Council and the Government of Alberta and the Government of Canada need to make decisions on 3 things, and I'd like to see all 3 of those decisions made in the first quarter of this year. The final decision on the alignment, the cash flow decision with the federal government and the province, and a resolution to the 90-day opt-out clause, which is continuing to be a real thorn in our side moving forward.
Following up on Lauren's question, there's a significant part of the Deputy Prime Minister's job purview is to deal with these issues of regional alienation and to help stamp them out. Did any of that come up, or was it more specific to these kind of small portfolios?
Well, of course it came up because it's part of the conversation we have, but I'm very interested in practical discussions. I've known the Deputy Prime Minister for many years. When she was a journalist, she did a big profile of me, that must have been 2011 or 2012. And so we've had lots of conversations over the years, before and after she got into politics, about what is happening in Alberta and what Alberta really needs. So we've tilled the ground pretty well on that conversation, I think. What I'm really interested in is moving to the next conversation, which is, so what does that mean? What positive things can the federal government do, not to win seats here or to improve their electoral fortunes, regardless of party, but actually to improve the economy here? Because fundamentally, this is a question that transcends politics. It's not about you lost all your seats in Alberta. It's about, if the Alberta economy doesn't work, then the nation doesn't work. Then the nation's economy doesn't work. You're never going to be able to balance the federal budget. And you're in a situation where people don't have hope and opportunity to be able to live great lives here. And that's really where I'm focused. I'm not at all interested in the partisanship or the politics of alienation. I'm interested in improving people's lives.
So touch on the local issue, just the violence.
Yeah, we can do anything you want, since I haven't seen you all in 3 whole
Might as
weeks.
well. The violent start to 2020.
Yes.
What's your concern with the murders and the violence?
I'm going to be sitting down with Chief Neufeld very shortly to talk about his feelings about the whole thing. Fundamentally, there are a number of messages here. Number one is, let's just remember that Calgary remains an extraordinarily safe city, by any measure. It's safer than it was when I was growing up in the 1970s. And certainly, people should feel comfortable walking down any street in Calgary at any time of the day or night, that their personal safety is not at risk. That said, I'm very concerned about the increase in targeted violence. And I really need to understand from my colleagues at the Calgary Police Service how they're doing with that and what help they could use from the city or from the citizens at large in terms of thinking about this. Because at some point, perception becomes reality. And certainly, I can go on and say, look, it's statistical noise, a bunch of stuff happened in the first week, and maybe, knock on wood, nothing will happen for months after that. But at the same time, when this concentration of these sorts of things happen, people get nervous, and that's human nature. People ought to get nervous, but I want people to remember that we have an outstanding police service, that we're a safe city. And I would also love people to really understand that there are resources available both for our police officers who are working incredibly hard on this, the women and men of the Calgary Police Service, but also for individuals. There are many, many opportunities for you to avail yourselves of victim services if you're directly impacted by a crime. There are opportunities to avail yourself of mental health services if you're getting nervous about your own safety in the city personally. So people, please look after yourselves as well. And you can always call 211, not 311, 211 with any concerns about resources that you would like to be attached to. And, of course, if you are witnesses to a crime, if you have information that can help the women and the men in police services, Crime Stoppers is anonymous. It works very, very well, and you can always contact them.
Is this going to factor into more discussions with the province after the issues with the budget?
Well, certainly the province did effectively cut 1/3 of their funding to the Calgary Police Service in the last budget. It's not a huge portion of our police funding, but it was money. That said, Council has not, in its last budget, did not make any cuts to the police service. We will be passing through the province's cut on the property tax side, and the police service will still have the opportunity to grow. So in that case, I think we've done well, but it is really, really, really important that the government of Alberta understand that urban crime is also an issue, not just rural crime, and that they have to be partners in both funding our police service, but also in helping our police service do the best job that the women and men of the Calgary Police Service can do. And I think it's important that the government of Alberta really come to the table with open hands and open hearts about how they can do a better job and not resort to partisanship in very important discussions about people's safety.